beautiful wife catches millionaire husband cheating at their wedding. She cancels everything on the spot. On a day meant to celebrate everlasting love, the unthinkable happens. A pregnant bride unearths a betrayal so profound that it brings her wedding to a standstill. Allison Harrington, radiant in white and carrying the hope of a new family, believes she's moments away from marital bliss with her millionaire fiancé Evan Carter. Instead, she stumbles upon a devastating secret that forces her to confront the very core of their relationship right at the altar. Hearts break, loyalties shatter, and an entire congregation watches in stunned silence. Get ready for a rollercoaster of deception, heartbreak, and strength discovered in the most shocking way. Allison Harrington had always pictured her wedding day as a fairy tale come to life. Raised in a modest family in the outskirts of Los Angeles, she spent years believing she'd never quite marry into the high-flying world of the elite. But all that changed when she met Evan Carter, charming, confident, and impossibly wealthy. He was every inch the self-made millionaire success story, complete with a penthouse view of the city and a coterie of influential friends. From their first encounter at a charity gala, Allison felt she'd found her modern-day Prince Charming. The engagement was swift. Within 6 months of dating, Evan proposed during a weekend getaway in Lake Como. He knelt on a velvet cushion in front of a candlelit table, ring in hand, while a string quartet played in the background. Overcome, Allison said yes without hesitation. It was a moment frozen in time, perfect, refined, and brimming with love, or so she believed. But as the wedding day approached, subtle hints of tension slipped through the cracks of their glittering life. Evan's phone buzzed incessantly at odd hours, and he stepped away to take calls in hushed tones. His once unwavering enthusiasm for wedding details waned. Though he lavished Allison with expensive gifts, a rare diamond necklace, a custom-designed wedding gown, his real presence felt distant. Whenever she tried to address this growing concern, he brushed her off with a reassuring smile and a promise that he was just dealing with business. Allison's pregnancy, a joyful surprise, only increased her longing for security and closeness. She was 3 months along, the baby bump still subtle beneath her flowing blouses. While Evan appeared happy about the news, quietly purchasing a top-of-the-line crib and scheduling tours of the best prenatal care facilities, Allison sensed a new wall between them, some intangible barrier that grew taller each day. When she confided in her best friend, Jessica Myers, Jessica merely patted her hand and said, "Maybe it's just pre-wedding jitters, Allie. Men get weird when big changes happen. Don't overthink it." Still, a flicker of doubt lingered. She couldn't help noticing how Evan's personal assistant, Cassie Brooks, showed up at the penthouse unannounced, bringing urgent files that seemed more personal than professional. Or how Cassie's smile lingered a bit too long whenever Allison appeared. When asked, Evan calmly insisted Cassie was indispensable to his business and that her efficiency saved him countless hours. Allison tried to believe him. Days before the wedding, they hosted a rehearsal dinner at Evan's family estate, a sprawling property perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. It was an opulent affair. Tiffany blue tablecloths adorned endless rows of tables, while fairy lights twinkled in the garden. Friends and family sipped champagne and wished the couple a lifetime of happiness. Yet amidst the celebration, Allison spotted Evan slipping away from the crowd. She followed him outside, heart pounding. There, in the moonlit garden, she found him locked in heated conversation with Cassie. Their body language was tense, Cassie's arms crossed. Allison couldn't hear their words, but the urgent hush in their voices rattled her. When Allison confronted Evan about it later, he dismissed her concerns. Cassie wanted to go over the final budgets for the wedding investments, he claimed. "You know how detail-oriented she is. always worried about the finances. Though her instincts screamed otherwise, Allison forced a smile and tried to let it go. After all, she had a wedding to focus on, and her heart was full of hope for the future. She reminded herself that Cassie was a long-time employee, and jealousy had no place in a trusting relationship, especially now, with a baby on the way. 2 nights before the wedding, Allison lay awake in bed, resting a protective hand over her belly. Evan slept beside her, seemingly at ease. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating the swirl of thoughts chasing through her mind. Was she imagining things? Could pre-wedding stress and the swirl of hormones be warping her judgment? She felt silly, guessing her fiancé, the man who'd swept her off her feet in such a grand fashion. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text message from an unknown number. Be careful. He's not who he says he is. Allison's pulse raced. She stared at the screen, half convinced it was a prank or a jealous ex. She considered waking Evan to show him the message, but a voice inside cautioned her to wait. If it meant nothing, no sense worrying him. But if it meant something, she needed to be cautious. Clutching the phone tightly, she rolled over, deciding to handle it in the morning. Little did she know that cryptic message would be the first domino in a line of shocking reveals. Her wedding day was around the corner, and the carefully curated world she'd built with Evan was on the brink of collapse. Yet, hope still shimmered in her heart. She trusted in love until the day love betrayed her, right at the altar. The morning of the wedding arrived bathed in sunshine. The coastal breeze carried the scent of salt and lavender into the open windows of the bridal suite. Allison sat before an ornate vanity mirror, her professional makeup artist, Yvonne, gently dabbing concealer beneath her eyes to cover the faint shadows caused by her restless night. The stylists bustled about, fixing her hair into a graceful updo adorned with delicate pearls and crystals. The wedding dress, custom designed by a well-known boutique in Beverly Hills, hung from a gilded hanger in the corner, waiting for its moment in the spotlight. Jessica Myers, her maid of honor, handed Allison a glass of freshly squeezed juice. "You need your vitamins, mum-to-be," she teased, trying to lighten the tension in the air. Jessica had an infectious smile that usually soothed Allison's nerves, but today it felt like even the sunniest disposition couldn't quell the swirling anxiety. Despite the flurry of hairstyling and final touches, the bride's mind drifted to the mysterious text message from the night before. She had half a mind to call the number back, but decided she didn't need extra drama on a day already brimming with nerves. Her mother, Patricia Harrington, entered the suite wearing a lavender floor-length gown that complemented the wedding's color scheme. Patricia was a pragmatic woman who'd supported Allison's every dream, even when Allison first introduced Evan, who was clearly from a much different social stratum. "Look at you," Patricia whispered, her eyes misty with pride as she squeezed Allison's hand. "You're glowing. Your father would have been so proud to see you on this day." Allison's heart constricted at the thought of her late father. She knew he would have liked Evan, or at least found his business acumen admirable. "Thank you, Mum," she replied, blinking back tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied mascara. "I just want today to be perfect." A sudden knock on the door jolted them. The wedding planner, Grayson Baker, an impeccably dressed man with an iPad in hand, peered into the suite. "We're a bit behind schedule," he announced in a hushed but urgent tone. "The ceremony is set to start in an hour, and guests are already arriving. Also, I have some forms for you to sign regarding the last-minute venue changes." Allison nodded and waved him in. The estate had changed a few details due to a slight weather concern, forcing them to relocate the outdoor reception area. She carefully scrawled her signature in the designated spots, while Grayson rattled off the day's timeline. The first look with the groom, the vow exchange in the main garden, followed by cocktails on the terrace, and a lavish dinner in the glass-walled conservatory. Everything sounded magical on paper, at least. Meanwhile, in the estate's opposite wing, Evan paced in his dressing room. He wore a tailored tuxedo with a crisp white shirt, finishing touches done by his personal valet. Yet, as he stared in the mirror, his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Cassie Brooks lingered in the corner, scrolling through her phone with a forced casualness. "Evan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." He spun to face her, tension coiling in his shoulders. "Not now," he hissed, glancing at the door to ensure no one else could hear. "I can't deal with this today." Cassie pressed her lips together, stepping closer. "I've tried to keep everything under wraps, but we're running out of time. If she finds out—" "Stop," Evan cut her off. "She's not going to find out. I'll handle it. Just trust me. And keep your head down." A wounded look crossed Cassie's face. "Fine," she whispered, turning on her heel. Before leaving, she cast a final glance over her shoulder, her eyes flickering with a complex blend of longing and resentment. "Don't forget, you made me promises, Evan." Left alone, Evan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. He'd never thought it would come to this. Guilt gnawed at him as he considered the possibility of everything unraveling right here, on the biggest day of his life. He had a reputation to maintain, a fortune to protect, and a bride who carried his child. The stakes had never been higher, and neither had the risk of getting caught. Back in the bridal suite, Allison slipped into her wedding gown. The dress fit like a dream, hugging her torso before cascading into soft layers of tulle. Jessica helped her secure the final button, gasping at how radiant Allison looked. For a moment, pure joy washed over her, dispelling all doubts. She gently placed a hand on her stomach. "We're doing this, little one," she murmured. As the final preparations concluded, Grayson returned, instructing Allison to head outside for the first look with Evan. Carefully, she descended the spiral staircase, Jessica trailing behind to adjust her train. Her heart pounded at the thought of seeing Evan, a swirl of excitement and lingering unease. She told herself it was just wedding day jitters, that once she looked into his eyes, everything would make sense again. Yet a tiny voice in her mind wouldn't be silenced. He's hiding something. And then there was that cryptic text message from the unknown number. What if it was trying to warn her? She took a shaky breath and stepped into the garden, where Evan stood facing away, waiting for his bride. Sunshine danced through the branches of the tall oaks, casting dappled patterns on the lush lawn. A gentle breeze fluttered the edges of Allison's veil. Evan turned, their eyes locked, and he visibly softened, a warm smile crossing his face. "You're breathtaking," he said quietly, reaching for her hands. In that instant, under the bright California sun, the surrounding doubts momentarily faded. She let her lips curve into a hopeful smile. This was supposed to be their forever sealed with vows in front of friends, family, and the child blossoming within her. If only illusions could remain unshattered. But fate, as Allison would soon discover, had other plans. The truth was about to crash the wedding, threatening to destroy everything in one swift blow. The sun was high and brilliant when Allison and Evan completed their first look photo session. A hush of excitement buzzed through the crowd of nearly 200 guests as they took their seats. The estate's main garden had been transformed into a whimsical wonderland, complete with cascading white roses, fragrant hydrangeas, and glimmering lanterns strung from archways. Soft classical music filled the air, courtesy of a live quartet. Allison stood with her father's best friend, Robert Langley, who was to walk her down the aisle in her father's stead. Her heart fluttered with anticipation, but beneath that veneer of bridal excitement was a persistent, nagging doubt she couldn't quite quell. She glanced around, trying to locate Cassie in the crowd. The personal assistant was nowhere to be seen. At last, the music shifted and the ceremony began. The bridesmaids drifted up the aisle in their pale lavender dresses, each wearing a soft smile. Then it was Allison's turn. As she took the first step onto the aisle, she felt every pair of eyes on her friends from her childhood, colleagues from Evan's business world, distant relatives, and well-wishers. She could see Evan at the altar, poised with a steady smile. For a moment, it felt surreal, as though she were walking through a dream she'd conjured 1,000 times. The officiant, a longtime family friend named Pastor Marcus Winston, greeted them with a warm nod. He began the ceremony with heartfelt words about love and commitment, speaking of the challenges and triumphs that marriage entailed. Allison's breath caught as she reminded herself of all the reasons she was here: love, devotion, the child they'd soon welcome into the world. Then came the vows. Evan cleared his throat, reaching for Allison's hands. He spoke of destiny, how from the moment he saw her, he knew she was the one. He apologized for the nights he'd worked late, explaining he only wanted to provide the best life for her and the baby. As he spoke, Allison's suspicions wavered, her heart swelling with renewed faith in the man who stood before her. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. She opened her mouth to recite her own vows, words she had rehearsed countless times. But before she could utter a single syllable, the hush of the garden shattered. A woman's voice, sharp and trembling with anger, rang out, "Stop! I can't let you go through with this, Evan." Heads turned, confusion rippling through the guests. Allison's stomach dropped. The voice belonged to Cassie Brooks. She stepped forward, her face pale but resolute, eyes glistening with tears. Dressed in a simple black sheath dress, she was a stark contrast to the pastel finery around her. Evan's face went slack with shock. "Cassie, what are you doing?" he hissed, stepping away from Allison. The officiant faltered, unsure whether to continue. Cassie ignored the murmuring crowd, her gaze fixed on Evan. "I can't stand here and watch you lie to her. Not again. Not after everything you told me last night." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Camera shutters clicked. Allison felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What is she talking about, Evan?" she managed, her voice trembling. Evan's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. "Cassie, you're confused. We talked about this. You promised you'd. I promised I'd wait." Cassie spat, voice cracking. "Wait for you to decide what you wanted. You told me you were only marrying Allison because she was pregnant, that it was a business move to secure your legacy. And that once the child was born, you'd. Her voice faltered, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Allison's ears rang. Her legs threatened to give way. Behind her, guests were whispering in shock, some even rising from their seats. Jessica Myers, tears in her own eyes, rushed forward to steady Allison by the elbow. Evan turned to Allison, desperation written across his features. "She's lying," he insisted, though his voice wavered. "This is some sick ploy for attention." Cassie let out a bitter laugh. "You told me you loved me. You said we'd run the company together one day, that you'd keep Allison on the side until the baby was born and secured your inheritance. How could you do this to both of us?" She turned toward Allison, her eyes brimming with remorse. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Allison's heart pounded. A film of cold sweat covered her brow. Every second seemed to stretch like an hour. She glanced between Evan and Cassie, looking for any sign this could be a twisted misunderstanding. But the tears in Cassie's eyes seemed genuine. So did the panic etched on Evan's face. In the far corner, a phone's camera flashed as someone recorded the scene, capturing every mortifying second for posterity. The officiant cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Maybe we should move this conversation elsewhere," he suggested softly. But Allison was in no mood to hide behind closed doors. Fury mingled with heartbreak in her chest, fueling a surge of adrenaline. She stepped away from Jessica's supporting arm and faced Evan, her voice trembling with betrayed anger. "Is this true? Did you tell her you only wanted me for my child, your child? Evan's mouth opened, but no coherent words formed. He cast a venomous glare at Cassie. I can explain, but not here. Everyone's watching. Allison's composure snapped. Of course they're watching. It's our wedding. She ripped the veil from her head and threw it aside. You know what? I don't need an explanation. Your silence tells me enough. Her eyes burned, tears threatening to spill over. With one shaky breath, she turned to the stunned crowd. There will be no wedding, not today, not ever. Gasps and murmurs erupted. Patricia Harrington, her mother, broke into sobs. The band trailed off into an awkward silence. Jessica clutched her chest, tears streaming. Amid the chaos, Cassie took a step closer to Allison, but Allison raised a trembling hand to stop her. I don't want to hear more. Just go. Evan attempted to reach for Allison, but she recoiled. Her mind spun with white-hot rage, heartbreak, and a protectiveness for her unborn child. Everything she'd known, every vow, every promise, every dream shattered in the span of a few sentences. Tearing the diamond ring off her finger, Allison flung it at Evan's feet. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked back down the aisle, tears blurring her vision. She passed rows of stunned guests, ignoring their wide-eyed stares. Jessica hurried after her, guiding her gently toward the mansion. Allison's wedding day had become a spectacle of betrayal and shattered illusions. The world she'd meticulously planned collapsed in public view, and there was no going back. All that remained was the uncertain path ahead, one she would have to navigate alone, with a baby on the way and a broken heart in tow. Allison locked herself in the bridal suite, the echo of gasps and whispered condemnations still ringing in her ears. Within minutes, the once merry throng of wedding guests had split into frantic clusters, uncertain whether to stay or leave. The garden's decor, a testament to months of planning and extravagant spending, now framed a thoroughly awkward scene. Meanwhile, Evan was nowhere in sight. Jessica paced outside the locked door, phone in hand, occasionally murmuring into it as she tried to manage the chaos. The wedding planner, Grayson, was near tears, apologizing profusely to the caterers, florists, and staff who were left in limbo. Patricia Harrington, shocked and livid, had retreated to the far side of the mansion, desperate to shield her daughter from the prying eyes of the press and social media influencers who were already uploading the fiasco in real time. Finally, Jessica knocked softly. "Allie, can I come in, please?" she pleaded. "You can't stay in there forever." Inside, Allison sat on the edge of a chaise lounge, her wedding gown crumpled around her. Her tear-streaked cheeks glistened, eyes puffy and red. The adrenaline surge that had fueled her public denouncement was fading, replaced by deep, hollow pain. She wiped her nose on a tissue. Taking a shaky breath, she unlocked the door. Jessica slipped in, shutting the door behind her. She sank down beside Allison, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Talk to me," she whispered. Allison turned to meet Jessica's gaze, fresh tears brimming in her eyes. "I feel like such a fool," she choked out. "How could I have missed the signs? My God, Jess, I'm pregnant with his child. I was ready to spend my life with him." Jessica pulled her into a comforting embrace. "You're not a fool. None of us saw this coming. He was the perfect fiancé, caring, attentive, and so protective of you." A bitter laugh escaped Allison's lips. "Protective of me, or protective of his image?" She glanced at her reflection in the suite's ornate mirror. The bride she saw looked haunted, the luster and joy replaced by heartbreak. "He said it was for business," she added softly. "He married me for an inheritance. To secure some twisted legacy for the baby." Jessica's jaw tightened. "That's what Cassie claimed, but we still don't have all the details." "I don't need more details," Allison said, her voice trembling with anger. "He lied to me, manipulated me, and humiliated me in front of everyone. That's enough. This wedding is off. Just then, another knock sounded at the door. Patricia Harrington entered, her expression tight with concern. "Ali, sweetheart, are you okay?" She stepped forward, folding her daughter into a hug. "I'm so sorry. If only your father were here," Allison's voice cracked. "Dad would have pummeled him," she whispered, letting out a shaky exhale. "He never would have let me marry someone like this." Patricia's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I know, but let's focus on you and the baby now. That's what matters." Jessica cleared her throat. "We need to figure out next steps." The guests are confused. "The media will be all over this story by tomorrow, if not sooner. Grayson is trying to manage the fallout, but we need to give him direction." Allison hesitated, her mind spinning. "Cancel everything. The wedding dinner, the reception, the hotel blocks, everything. I want them all to leave." She pulled off her wedding shoes and tossed them aside, wincing as the pins in her hair dug into her scalp. "Anyone who has a question can direct it to my lawyers once I find some." Patricia gently rubbed her daughter's back. "You heard her, Jessica. Let's clear out the guests. And let's make sure the press understands we have no comment right now." Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone again. "I'll handle it." Allison sat in silence, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. The suite seemed stifling, filled with the ghosts of a wedding that had ended before it began. She couldn't stop thinking about Cassie, who had claimed Evan's affection all along. Or the texts from the unknown number, warning her about Evan's true nature. Why hadn't she listened to those signs sooner? Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, Evan stood amidst a sea of deserted chairs and half-eaten appetizers. He stared at the shattered champagne glasses on the lawn, remnants from guests who'd dropped them in shock. Cassie lingered nearby, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I had to do it," she whispered, stepping closer. "You were never going to tell her the truth." He whipped around, face contorted with fury. "You ruined my life," he seethed. "I told you I had a plan, and you decided to blow it up in front of the world. Now my deal with the Carter Trust could be gone. My father was watching, my entire board was watching." Cassie trembled, but her resolve remained. "You promised me you'd break it off with her after the wedding. That we'd be together, that you only needed her to produce an heir to guarantee your inheritance. I couldn't stand there and watch you say those vows, not when you told me you loved me." Evan clenched his fists, torn between rage and desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done? If that trust fund is revoked, if the board sees me as unreliable, my entire empire could collapse." Cassie's lower lip quivered. "And what about me? You lied to me, made me believe I was the one you truly loved, that you were only marrying her as a formality. I found the ring you bought for her. You never intended to leave." He glared at her. "I told you everything was going according to plan until you decided to open your mouth." They stood there in silence, the echoes of the wedding fiasco swirling around them. Photographers snapped photos. Reporters whispered into microphones at the gates. In the far distance, the hum of cars departing could be heard as guests left the estate, scandalized and bewildered. Evan ran a hand through his hair, adrenaline pulsing. "I need to speak to Allison," he muttered. "I can't let it end like this." Cassie sniffed. "Good luck. She hates you now, and she has every right to. You can't fix this with an apology." Leaving Cassie behind, Evan marched toward the mansion, ignoring the event staff who tried to intercept him. He headed straight for the bridal suite, only to find Patricia Harrington standing guard at the door. "Get out of my way," he demanded. Patricia lifted her chin, her voice icy. "You've done enough harm." "My daughter doesn't want to see you right now." He tried to push past her, but Jessica emerged from the suite, stepping between them. "Back off," she warned. "She's in no condition to deal with you." If you care about her or that baby at all, you'll leave. Evan's shoulders sagged in defeat. He looked at the door, a swirl of regret crossing his features. Eventually he turned away, footsteps echoing down the corridor. Inside the suite, Allison heard his fading steps, her heart torn between anger and a painful longing for what might have been. In that moment, she realized the world she'd built with Evan, its promise of love, wealth, and family had been nothing but a mirage. Now, she had to pick up the broken pieces and forge a new path for herself and the child she carried. And she would do it without the man who betrayed her when she needed him most. By sunrise the next morning, the estate was unrecognizable. Tables once laden with floral centerpieces and gourmet hors d'oeuvre had been cleared away. The crystal chandeliers, chairs and decorations were packed into trucks by exhausted event staff. A hush of unease blanketed the grounds, as if even the flowers and birds understood the calamity that had unfolded. Allison awoke in her old bedroom at her mother's modest home, a place she hadn't lived in since moving into Evan's penthouse. The shock of the previous day clung to her like a damp fog. Her phone was inundated with missed calls, texts, and social media alerts. She spotted countless notifications from friends, acquaintances, even some tabloids. Titles like Millionaire Groom, Exposed at the Altar, Wedding from Hell, and Pregnant Bride. Betrayed popped up in her feed. "Turn it off, Allie," Jessica urged. She had stayed by Allison's side, refusing to leave her alone in the aftermath. Now, they sat at the dining table where Allison once did her homework, a pot of tea between them. Patricia bustled about the kitchen, fussing over eggs and toast, desperate to help her daughter in any way she could. Allison pressed a hand to her temple, feeling a throbbing headache intensify with every beep of her phone. Without a word, she powered it down, severing the torrent of digital chaos. She stared at the blank screen, a swirl of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak swirling inside her chest. Jessica reached across the table, covering Allison's hand with her own. "You don't have to face the world today," she murmured. "Give yourself time." Allison nodded, fighting back tears. "I wish I could forget it all. Just bury my head in the sand until the baby's born." Her other hand drifted to her slight bump. "I can't believe I almost married someone who wanted me just for this child." Patricia set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Allison. "Don't let him rob you of your appetite," she said gently. "You need to stay strong for the baby." Allison mustered a wan smile, though food was the last thing on her mind. Across the kitchen, Jessica glanced at the clock. "I'll make a quick run to the store," she announced. "We need a few essentials. Allie, do you want anything in particular?" Allison shook her head. "I can't think of anything right now. Just be careful." Jessica squeezed her shoulder. "I'll be back soon." Once Jessica departed, the silence grew heavier. Patricia cleared her throat. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about next steps," she began softly. "I know you're hurting, but have you thought about how you want to handle your relationship with Evan regarding the baby?" Allison sipped her tea, an ache forming in her chest. "He might be a terrible partner, but he's still the child's father," she murmured, the words tangling in her throat. "He has rights, but I can't even imagine letting him near me right now." Patricia nodded. "That's understandable, but you need to protect yourself legally, financially. He's a man of substantial means, and he might try to manipulate the situation. You should talk to a lawyer." Allison swallowed the knot in her throat. The thought of facing lawyers and custody battles made her dizzy, but she knew her mother was right. "I will, Mum. Just give me a few days." Suddenly, a firm knock on the front door jolted them. Patricia's eyes widened in alarm. "I'll get it," she whispered, hurrying to the entryway. Allison's heart hammered. The mere idea that it could be Evan on the other side of that door sent waves of fear and rage coursing through her. Moments later, Patricia returned with a tall, lean man in a tailored suit. Allison recognized him as Joseph Goldman, Evan's top legal advisor and, ironically, the notary who was supposed to witness their prenuptial agreement. Her stomach clenched. What is he doing here? Joseph stood politely, hands clasped. Allison, I'm sorry for the intrusion, he began, voice measured. I came to deliver some documents on Evan's behalf and to express his deep regret over yesterday's events. Patricia's eyes flashed. He has some nerve, sending his lawyer to our home. Couldn't he do this himself? Joseph cleared his throat. I understand your anger, Miss S. Harrington, but my client felt it best to give Allison some space. He also wanted to ensure she has what she needs during this stressful time. Allison's face hardened. What do you mean by that? Reaching into his briefcase, Joseph produced a manila folder. Evan asked me to deliver this. It's a financial provision for you and the baby. He's voluntarily offering monthly support effective immediately, as well as covering all medical bills associated with your pregnancy. Allison refused to open the folder. Is that supposed to buy my forgiveness? Joseph's eyes flickered with discomfort. It's merely a gesture. Evan hopes eventually you'll at least be willing to have a conversation with him. He regrets the turmoil caused. Silence stretched, tension crackling in the air. Patricia put a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. Maybe you should speak to a lawyer before signing anything, she said pointedly. Allison nodded, swallowing hard. She wanted to rip the folder to shreds and throw it in Joseph's face. Yet a practical side of her recognized she had a baby to consider. I'll review it with legal counsel, she said stiffly. But tell Evan this changes nothing. He betrayed me in the worst way. Joseph inclined his head. I will convey your message. Again, my apologies for the disturbance. With that, he handed her his business card, tucked his briefcase under his arm, and left. The moment the door closed, Allison finally exhaled. She sank onto the couch, tears threatening again. Patricia took the folder and set it aside, kneeling beside her. Focus on healing right now, she said softly. We'll tackle the legal stuff together. You're not alone in this. Allison nodded, her shoulders sagging. The heartbreak was relentless, a raw wound that refused to close. She worried for her future, raising a child without the fairy tale family she'd envisioned. What would life look like now? A single mother battling a wealthy ex who saw her as a pawn in a corporate game. But beneath her grief burned a small flicker of determination. She wouldn't allow herself or her child to become another casualty of Evan's manipulations. A new day was dawning, shaped by heartbreak, but also by a mother's fierce resolve. And though the road ahead looked steep and uncertain, Allison resolved to climb it step by painful step until she and her baby stood on solid ground again. 5 days after the disastrous wedding, Allison found herself sitting in a polished downtown office. The plaque on the door read, Elizabeth Meyer, Attorney at Law. Elizabeth had come highly recommended by an old friend of her father's, reputed for being a formidable litigator and a staunch advocate for women's rights. As Allison waited in the reception area, she couldn't help fiddling with her phone, though the barrage of texts and calls had barely subsided. Part of her wanted to vanish from the public eye, but the practical side knew she had to face the aftermath head-on. She was done being a passive participant in her own life. When Elizabeth Meyer finally emerged, she greeted Allison with a warm smile and guided her into a private conference room. I'm so sorry for what you've been through, she said, gesturing for Allison to take a seat. But let's figure out how to protect you and your baby. Allison placed the manila folder from Joseph Goldman on the table, along with the prenuptial agreement that had never been signed. I don't know where to start, she admitted, her voice quivering. He offered financial support, but it feels like hush money. My mother says I should be careful, but I also need to think about prenatal care, bills. I'm just so overwhelmed. Elizabeth flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. First, we'll confirm the authenticity of these offers and ensure they're not angled to undermine your rights. Then we'll explore your legal standing for child support, custody arrangements, and potential damages if we can prove emotional distress or fraudulent behavior surrounding your relationship. Allison stared at her hands, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down. What if Evan fights back? He has an army of lawyers, more money than I can imagine. I can't handle a drawn-out battle. Elizabeth nodded sympathetically. I understand, but you have more leverage than you realize. Public opinion is largely on your side, given how everything transpired. If he doesn't settle fairly, we can go public with even more damaging details. Trust me, someone in his position can't afford that kind of negative press. We'll negotiate from a position of strength. Allison took a shaky breath. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a glimmer of hope. Elizabeth's confidence was reassuring someone who believed that justice could be served, or at least a semblance of it. She blinked away tears and mustered a small smile. "Okay," she whispered, "let's do it." Outside, the city bustled with midday traffic, pedestrians hustling down sidewalks, blissfully unaware of Allison's personal crisis. She left Elizabeth's office feeling lighter, armed with at least a preliminary plan. She'd meet with Evan's legal team under Elizabeth's guidance, evaluate the financial support contract, and discuss custody terms for the unborn child. Yet the day was not done with her. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a sleek black sedan, Cassie Brooks. Tension coiled in Allison's stomach, an instinctive reaction to the woman who'd turned her wedding into a public scandal. Cassie, looking decidedly less polished than usual, approached cautiously. "Allison," Cassie began, voice subdued. "Please, can we talk?" Allison hesitated, her mind flashing back to the humiliating scene at the altar. A swirl of anger threatened to resurface, but curiosity mingled with a strange pity. Cassie seemed contrite. "Fine," Allison said, crossing her arms, "but make it quick." Cassie nodded. "I'm sorry about what happened. I never meant to humiliate you like that. I couldn't watch him lie anymore. I thought he was serious about leaving you after the baby was born. Turns out he was stringing me along too." Allison's jaw tensed. "You still helped him cheat on me. Lied to me every day while I was planning our wedding. You only spoke up when it suited you." A haunted look crossed Cassie's face. "You're right, I was selfish. I let him convince me that you two were just a formality, that the child was his key to an inheritance he desperately wanted. I'm not proud of it, but I never expected to see you so heartbroken. It made me realize what a monster he'd become, or maybe what a monster he always was." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The city noises surrounded them, car horns, snippets of conversation, the distant rumble of construction. Cassie broke the silence. "I want to help you if I can. I know things about his finances, his offshore accounts, the real reason he's so desperate for an heir. It might give you leverage." Allison blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "Why would you help me now?" A sad smile tugged at Cassie's lips. "Because I'm done with him too. He's cut me off, threatened to destroy my career if I speak out. But I can't keep living with this guilt. If I can help you and your baby, maybe I can salvage a shred of my conscience." Allison studied Cassie, uncertain. Part of her wanted to turn away, to reject any association with the woman who had played a key role in her heartbreak. But another part recognized the potential value in Cassie's information. "I have a lawyer now," Allison said cautiously. "If you truly want to help, speak to her. But I won't make any deals without ensuring it's safe." Cassie nodded, relief evident on her face. "Thank you. I'll do whatever I can." They exchanged contact details, Cassie promising to forward documents. Then she slipped into her car and drove off, leaving Allison on the sidewalk with her thoughts spinning. Could Cassie be trusted, or was this another manipulation to protect her own interests? Back at her mother's house, Allison relayed the encounter to Patricia and Jessica. Both were skeptical, but Patricia eventually sighed. She might be telling the truth. That man is a piece of work. If her information can help you secure financial stability and legal protection, it's worth investigating. Jessica nodded in agreement, though her eyes remained wary. Just tread carefully, Allie. Allison stared at the slip of paper with Cassie's number. Despite her hesitation, a spark of cautious optimism ignited in her chest. She was no longer that naive bride blindly walking toward betrayal. This was a new chapter, one where she would shield her unborn child from Evan's schemes and, perhaps, find justice in a twisted situation. For the first time since the wedding that never was, Allison felt as though the tides were turning in her favor, however slightly. She wasn't sure if she would ever fully trust again, but she knew she would fight for her child's future with every ounce of strength she had. And if that meant collaborating with an unlikely ally, so be it, because in the aftermath of heartbreak, resilience might just be the key to her salvation. The next few weeks blurred with legal filings, tense phone calls, and a media storm that refused to die down. Allison watched from the sidelines as her story became fodder for tabloids and talk shows. Pregnant bride cancels. Lavish wedding groom exposed for infidelity and deception. She received calls from daytime television hosts requesting interviews, offers from ghostwriters wanting to pen a tell-all book, and even a sensational request to appear on a reality TV show for scorned brides. She turned them all down. Her priority was the well-being of her unborn child, and she had no interest in turning her private tragedy into public spectacle, even though it already felt like the world was gawking at her life. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Elizabeth Meyer orchestrated a carefully calibrated legal strategy. With Cassie Brooks providing insider information, they had compiled a dossier on Evan's business dealings that painted a startling picture: hidden trusts, precarious real estate investments, and a corporate board that valued the continuity of the Carter lineage above all else. The impetus for Evan's rush to produce an heir became clear without one. Certain trust funds and control over key assets would revert to other distant family members. Allison's heartbreak deepened with every revelation. She had been nothing more than a vessel for an inheritance. Yet amid the pain, a fierce resolve took root. If Evan wanted to treat her and her child like pawns, she would become the queen on the chessboard, determined to protect her baby's future. One afternoon, Evan's legal team scheduled a meeting at a neutral conference center. Allison arrived flanked by Elizabeth Meyer and Cassie, who insisted on attending as a witness despite the tension. Evan was already there, seated at a long, polished table with Joseph Goldman and two more attorneys in tailored suits. The atmosphere crackled with hostility. Evan rose as soon as Allison entered, his features taut. She ignored him, focusing instead on her seat at the opposite end of the table. Elizabeth took a spot beside her, while Cassie sat quietly behind them, eyes lowered. Joseph cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss an out-of-court settlement regarding financial support, custody arrangements, and any further obligations you may have toward each other." Elizabeth tapped her pen on a folder. "We have a list of terms that we believe are fair. First, Allison is entitled to monthly child support commensurate with Evan's income. We also request a trust fund be established for the child's education and future expenses, independent of Evan's direct control." Evan looked pained, but he nodded slightly. "I'm willing to do that. I want to ensure my child is taken care of." Allison refused to be swayed by the hint of sincerity in his voice. "You want to ensure your control, you mean?" she murmured, speaking for the first time that day. "Let's not pretend this is out of pure fatherly love." His gaze flicked to her, eyes momentarily filled with something akin to regret. I know you hate me, Allison, but you must see reason. I genuinely want to be part of our child's life. Her temper flared. Reason? You used me, Evan. You lied about loving me for your own financial gain. I can't ignore that. But I won't deny my child a father if that father can be decent, which is yet to be proven. Joseph intervened. Let's keep this civil. We propose shared custody once the child is born, with incremental visitation rights as the infant grows. Evan is prepared to set up the trust fund, as well as cover all prenatal and postnatal medical expenses. Elizabeth exchanged a look with Allison. We can consider shared custody, but only if Evan undergoes family therapy and demonstrates consistent involvement free of manipulation. Evan bristled at the mention of therapy. I'm not some head case, he muttered, but Joseph placed a restraining hand on his arm. The therapy requirement is a non-negotiable point, Elizabeth added calmly. Given the circumstances of betrayal and the toxic environment, we want to ensure the best possible emotional health for Allison and the child. Tension hung thick in the air as both sides volleyed demands and concessions. Cassie sat quietly, occasionally whispering clarifications about Evan's finances to Elizabeth. Each time, Evan threw her a glare that could scorch steel, but she met his anger with stoic composure, as if committed to this new path she'd chosen. By the end of the day, they had reached a tentative framework. Evan would provide substantial financial support, set up a trust fund, and agree to therapy sessions. Allison would allow structured visitation once the baby was born, provided the environment was safe and healthy. I want it in writing that you won't try to sabotage me, Allison said, voice shaking. No more lies, no attempts to paint me as an unfit mother to your board or your family, no campaigns to force me into giving up custody. Evan's expression softened. I swear I wouldn't do that, but if it makes you feel safer, we'll include it. Everything in writing, Elizabeth emphasized, concluding the meeting. We'll finalize the terms and have the contracts drawn up within a week. As they rose from the table, Cassie made to leave first, but Evan grabbed her wrist. You, he growled under his breath. I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed everything. She pulled away, glaring. No, Evan, you destroyed it yourself. I just refuse to let you continue hurting Allison with your lies. Turning on her heel, she stalked out. Allison watched the exchange, heart heavy. For all his flaws, she remembered how Evan used to be when they first met, charming, attentive, seemingly full of love. But that man was a mirage, and the cold reality was seated across from her. She gathered her things, resisting the urge to look back. Outside, the late afternoon sunlight glowed, a stark contrast to the tension inside. Elizabeth patted Allison's shoulder. We're getting closer to resolution, she said gently. It won't fix everything, but at least it's a start. Allison nodded, inhaling the warm air. Each step forward felt like a victory, but also a reminder of how profoundly her life had changed. Still, she was determined. She'd fight for her baby's future, refusing to let heartbreak define her or her child. The battle lines were drawn, and though the scars might never fully heal, she would emerge stronger on the other side. 2 months after the disastrous wedding day, autumn arrived in Los Angeles with a fresh chill in the air. For Allison, it marked a season of change, far more profound than the weather. She had moved into a modest but cozy townhome near her mother's neighborhood, a stark contrast to the lavish penthouse she once shared with Evan. Now 5 months pregnant, she focused on preparing for motherhood and rebuilding her life on her own terms. Her heartbreak still lingered, but legal matters required her attention. With her lawyer, Elizabeth Meyer, she had negotiated a formal agreement with Evan. He would cover her medical expenses, pay substantial child support, and set up a trust fund for the baby. In return, Allison agreed to consider structured visitation once the child was born. To ensure a healthier environment, Evan had also begun therapy sessions mandated by the court. Early one evening, Allison visited the Carter Trust headquarters to sign the final paperwork. Stepping into the marble-floored lobby, she found Evan waiting in a tailored suit. They exchanged tense greetings, then rode the elevator in silence to a conference room where their lawyers and a notary awaited. The atmosphere felt heavy with lingering regret. They painstakingly reviewed every clause, ensuring both parties' interests and, most importantly, the baby's future were protected. Once the documents were signed, Joseph Goldman, Evan's top legal advisor, shook hands with Elizabeth. Evan looked at Allison, his expression torn between remorse and resignation. "I know I've caused you so much pain," he said quietly, "but I hope one day we can find a way to move forward for our child's sake." Allison's gaze hardened. She simply nodded and left without another word. Outside, the waning sunlight cast long shadows on the busy street. Allison felt a curious sense of relief. The arrangement was a reminder that Evan still loomed in her life, but her path was now her own. She had returned to part-time work at a local non-profit, helping families in crisis, a role that brought her solace. She also spent her free time painting her baby's nursery a gentle mint green, symbolizing the fresh start she desperately needed. Jessica and Allison's mother, Patricia, stood by her throughout. They refused to let her fall into despair, inviting her to small gatherings and helping her gather baby essentials from thrift stores and estate sales. Even Cassie Brooks occasionally pitched in, sending Allison tips about second-hand baby gear. Cassie claimed it was her way of making amends for her role in the scandal. Though Allison's heart still ached, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. Each kick of her unborn child reaffirmed her resolve to create a loving, stable home, one defined not by Evan's wealth or broken promises, but by honest support and unwavering devotion. The glitzy wedding might have imploded in a blaze of betrayal, yet out of those ashes rose a more determined woman, ready to embrace life on her own terms. Despite the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the public fallout, Allison discovered that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the strongest versions of ourselves. What began as a humiliating wedding day ended with a fierce, loving mother to be ready to defend her child's future at any cost. Although the scars would never fully fade, they became reminders of her resilience and proof that she refused to be defined by one man's treachery. Thank you for joining this emotional journey. If this story gripped your heart and made you root for Allison's triumph over betrayal, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic tales. Drop a comment below. Would you give Evan another chance, or leave him in the rearview mirror? Hit the notification bell to stay tuned, because you won't want to miss what happens next in our world of twists, turns, and ultimate redemption.